Okay, everybody. Started a little bit early, so here we go. Okay, let me just get right to it. So we had this big move today. Duh. S&P's up almost 10%. At one point, it was over 10%. Um, and here's the thing. I just went through it in really, really good detail in the premium section here, which I hope ultimately you'll all be a part of, but that's your choice, not mine. But the semiconductors, for example, went really, really hard. I don't know if I haven't even looked at all the sector charts, but I got a feeling they're all kind of up. Um, I hell, maybe even housing. You never know. Yep, even housing's up. So we've got a really, really big broad-based rally, and I think we'll just say a meaningful amount of that is either short covering or maybe kind of like the end of margin calls from yesterday's big bloodbath, um, or maybe short squeezes. I think all of the above has been happening, and that's pushed this equity market to just like these massive levels of extreme volatility just over the last few days. You got to move in the VIX, basically doubled. And then since the top, it's come down almost 50%. At one point, I think it was about 50%. So this is the kind of stuff, frankly, I'm not predicting this, but this is the kind of stuff that bottoms are made of. And I'm not saying, definitely not saying that we run up from here because we still do have this trend line, this downtrending line of resistance in place. But what I'm saying is this was a big, massive puke fest. You can see this on the volume for 3 big days. Each day, the volume was up almost. I mean, this one on Monday, it actually was at a record high. But 3 days in a row of this massive, massive selling, closing right at the low. But then we get this day where we get a big gap down and then a nice close. Like this was the day, frankly, that the bulls really made a stand. Still hit a lower low and a lower high, but the bulls really made a stand here. The selling, unlike this day when the selling went all the way to the closing bell, and this day all the way to the closing bell, the selling, there wasn't enough to push this down further. So instead, we got a little snapback of shorts covering, excuse me, and buyers coming in. But then yesterday, you get a nice gap up, which you can kind of expect on a situation like this, and then another big move down. Pretty bad close, not horrible, all things considered, but a pretty bad close. But the big tell here is look at the volume. High volume, almost not quite, but almost twice the average volume. But it was a huge drop off from where it was the day before. And so you combine that with the way this trend has gone, you see, like, okay, this was a gap and crap, but it was on low volume. So, looks to me like maybe the selling is over. On the other side, you would say, okay, well, the worst thing that a market can do is get very oversold and then stay that way. Like make these weak little rallies, but they never go beyond weak rallies and then it goes lower still. So there's that side of the argument. Well, the best thing that a market can do is go down, like really, really sell off, then have a little rally that doesn't really fail. It just comes back really, really quick to test this low, passes that test, and then we're off to the races. So what do we expect between now and I don't know, whenever? I'm still honoring this trend line here. You got to honor. I mentioned in the trading room today. I'll take it to the SPX. When this thing first started, I posted like, "Hey, this will be a 5,400 day today. Maybe this week, but pretty much maybe today." And that's really what we got. So this thing comes way up here. And now where are we? We're back at this level, back at like 5,600, which was a key breakdown. But the most important thing, and this is a weekly chart, the most important thing to note is this part of the sell-off was due to something else. I mean, the market has anticipated tariffs for a long time because Trump's been yammering about them for a long time. but there was probably kind of a little bit of chicken going on, even if it was just playing with yourself. And if you do that, make sure you have your webcam turned off, by the way. But it was I don't even know why I actually do know why I said that. But the point is, the market was anticipating tariffs, but there was this sense that, well, maybe he's just bluffing because this is a really stupid thing to do. We know this because even Justin Trudeau, the last bastion of true brain trust, told Donald that it was a really stupid thing for him to be imposing tariffs. Nobody really knows where Justin Trudeau is right now. Um, oh, hang on just a minute. Anyway, sorry about that. The good news is one of my wonderful dogs that was having surgery today came out of the surgery okay. So that's an awesome thing. Um, the bad news is I forgot precisely where I was. So I'll just kind of continue on here with my thoughts. So after this kind of move today, I think that we can probably expect a little bit more of a move tomorrow. Now, will we rush and break right through the 50-day moving average and move up? This is the 50. Hang on just a sec. I had a weekly time frame there. Um, will we rush and break through this level? I kind of doubt it, at least not without a big without a big rest phase, because the market was already drifting lower before Trump put these tariffs on, and there was a lot of conjecture that he wouldn't do it after all. That's typically when you look at Trump and bet that he's not going to do anything brash or whatever. That's probably a losing bet. You want to get odds on that. But my sense is this could probably run right up to the pre-tariff resistance here. This level here, a lot of unhappy folks here, could run right into this box and then have a little bit of a sell-off or at least some consolidation. So I just want to leave you with this. I didn't want to make this video too long. Members, you got a longer one, much longer, but I just wanted to put this out there in the ether to just hopefully kind of bring a little bit of reality into the situation, that these kind of breakouts like this is a massive short squeeze. Anybody who was still short down here deserves to be squeezed. It's the way I look at it. But I seriously doubt that after tomorrow, we'll just keep going up unless there's some kind of news. This is the 50, this is the 200, and you can see where they're likely to cross within a couple weeks. Right around here, I'll say like the 15th, 16th, 17th, something like that. We're going to get a bearish crossover, and then you'll hear a lot of technicians talking about that too. So don't look at this as much more than a one-day wonder. Nevertheless, I do view Monday's turnaround here, and this was indeed a turnaround. I view this as a tradable low. 481.80 is a tradable low. I suspect that we're not going to get back down below that level for quite a while. Whether we're ultimately going to go down there, I have no idea, probably so. But I think this is a kind of a make hay while the sun shines. Find those stocks that are working really well. Always manage your risk. Know exactly what your worst case scenario is and be okay with that. And if you can do that, you're going to ride through this just fine and you're going to make some money. Okay, that's all I got for you. Members, get to the strategy session. I went through a lot of stocks today and I want you to check out all of them.